Okay, we'll call this Land Use Committee meeting of Tuesday, June 13th, 2017 to order. Thank you all for being here. Due to time constraints, we're going to have to do a little bit of shifting to the schedule. Can I get a motion to defer item 3B to a future meeting?
So moved, Neitzer.
Okay, moved by Councilor Neitzer, seconded Councilor Staley, and all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Next, can we get a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting of April 18th?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilor Kiley, second Councilor Neitzer. All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we'll get right to it. We'll now move on to our first presentation by Councilor Erpenbach. Welcome, Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your new chairmanship. I also appreciate the blue shirt and yellow tie combination. Go Jacks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to introduce this commentary one more time and remind you that the rental registration ordinance as it sits on the books now is about 14 years old. It was built as kind of a protection, and it is one of those ordinances that has sat there for a long time and hasn't really been used in the way that probably it should have been. And it also has a couple of issues that we're going to try to fix with the ordinance, the amendments that we're proposing tonight. I'd also like to thank the committee for hearing us out a couple of months ago when we just kind of brought a rough draft to you, and it really showed for me yet again what collaboration does when we work together in government. To help us think through that process, we've spent more than a year working through this, and to help us think through yet again what is it that we're trying to do, what are we trying to accomplish, was really very helpful, so I appreciate the committee's help on this. Then the other piece of it for me is just a reminder about the reason that I started down this road more than it's really been a part of the process of the entire 7 years that I've been on the Sioux Falls City Council. It really is one of those things that has come from the citizens of this community. The rental registration ordinance does three things in my mind. It protects three different groups of people. One, it protects those landlords who really are good landlords, and it is the vast majority of landlords are good, honest, hardworking people who are just trying to make a living in a business that is highly regulated and very difficult to keep, to make a profit. The second group of people really is those tenants, those people who are renting for whatever reason and very often are looking for what we call affordable or workforce housing, which is maybe a little bit, I don't want to say substandard, but maybe not up to the standards that you and I live in. And they're really looking for it based on income. And they really do need a safe and decent place to live. And sometimes, more often than you would like to know, it isn't safe and it isn't decent. And they don't feel like they have any way to get around that. And the third group of people then are the people that have spoke most loudly to me, and those are the neighbors of the places where those people who are not awesome landlords are renting the homes and the apartments that are substandard, truly substandard, and are a difficulty and an eyesore in a neighborhood. And so I really have, again, those three different groups in mind as we talk through this ordinance. And we have spent, as I said, more than a year. I did bring together several members of the city administration staff from several departments, health department, police and fire, planning and zoning, and code enforcement, of course. We're all involved with this, as well as our own city council staff. And it's been a very collaborative effort. We also brought citizens into this as well to have these conversations. So again, it's an introduction to where Sioux Falls is headed in terms of how we legislate on behalf of all the people that are involved with rental properties. It will change and evolve over time, but right now we really need to get to that point where we are most able to care for those folks in the most need, and we're most able to deal with those landlords that are not providing great accommodations for those people who rent their properties. I'm going to turn it over to Matt Tobias, who is our Code Enforcement Director, and he will talk through the details of the changes to the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Matt.
Yep. Thank you, Councilor, and thank you, Land Use Committee, also for letting us come to, again, like you said, last time we brought kind of a rough draft with us. We have had several sit-down meetings to kind of go through. We took back all the constructive feedback we received last time. So where we're at with this right now is I'm just going to, like Councilor Urbanbach mentioned, I'm just going to kind of cover a few of the changes that we're going to go through. A residential rental unit, basically what's underlined in red is a change. Basically we're saying it does not mean homes that qualify for owner-occupied classification under South Dakota Codified Law 10-13. What we're saying there is if someone's living in the property and if it's owner-occupied and you're living there and your son wants to live in your basement after he comes back from college, like I did, you don't have to register your property as a rental. You don't have to, just because you have someone living in the basement for a short period of time. So we're spelling that out that way. We did want to include the definition of a short-term rental unit, which basically says a residential rental unit that is rented for 28 consecutive days or less. That's the definition of a short-term rental unit. And then, as you can see, some of the things that are striked out there are things that were in there in the past that we've decided to take out this time. But if we decided to leave in there, if the property owner does not reside within 50 miles from city limits, the name, phone number, and mailing address of the responsible party who shall reside within Minnehaha or Lincoln counties and be authorized to make order or repairs to services of the property if in violation of city ordinances or state law. This is the key part to this ordinance. I'll say that. What this does is that basically it gives us a secondary contact besides the owner. And that's something that, and I'll speak in the code enforcement world, that if we have another person to contact versus the owner, it's a good thing for us. So we decided to leave that piece in here. Let's keep scrolling down there, Jim. And then at the end there, where we have property transfers, we basically, to transfer a permit from a residential rental unit from one owner, and we added the owner's responsible party or management company to another. The applicant shall give a written notice including the name and the address of the transferee to the city of the transfer within 30 days after that transfer. So we took out the inspection portion of the ordinance that we had last time. But we feel strongly about some of the things we decided to keep in there. And it does go back to that contact, that secondary contact, and the responsibility of that secondary contact. And it is the rental registration ordinance itself. I mean, multiple different departments use it. We use it for basically it's good information. I've had several different conversations with different departments. Community development is one that uses rental registration because of the revolving loan funds that landlords can qualify for to get funding for properties to redo their properties, to put a new roof on the property or whatnot. We take that information, and if it's designated in a neighborhood where we know we have a lot of rentals, we're going to reach out to those landlords and say, hey, we have these programs for community development. I have recently talked with title companies on how we're going to get this information out there, because that's one thing. This thing has been on the books, we said, for 13 years. We want to see, ultimately, we like to see all of our properties registered, but the big thing that comes down is we want compliance. When there's a violation on the property, we want to try to get compliance, and we want to try to get compliance as quickly as possible. And that's where that secondary contact comes into play. If we go after an owner and an owner doesn't, they're absent and they don't care to deal with the property, we just need somebody else to actually step up and help us out with that to bring the property back into compliance. So those are the big changes for the ordinance at this point in time. So any questions, we would be glad to answer them.
Okay, thank you. I know that normally we don't open it up to like public discussion or input, but I think we did last time just because somebody was here to address this. Did we want to open it up if anybody had a quick word, and probably quick with their timeline?
It would have
input.
To be. If we know someone wants to specifically address it, I know it was useful the last time.
I would really be interested to hear from the organization that's here.
Sure.
Okay, so somebody would like to address, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Brian Majers. I am the chairman of the board, president of South Dakota Multi-Housing Association. The one concern that I wish to address is if you go to 150.177, it's on your second page, then to B and point 2. That starts out, if the property owner does not reside within the 50 miles of Sioux Falls city limit. I know there's concerns about that basic statement of where somebody has to now reside, or they have to find, if they don't meet that requirement, they have to find a responsible party who lives in Minnehaha, Lincoln County. Our concern there is in that word responsible party, and then when it goes down and says authorized to make or order repairs or services for the property. From our perspective, once you've made that statement of a responsible party who's authorized, you're now going to be requiring that property owner to have a licensed property manager and a contract with them, or that person who's the responsible party is going to be in violation of state law. Now that's our reading. Your attorneys might have a different reading of it. We have to talk with our attorney about that. But as we're looking at it, you're now saying that person who doesn't live within Sioux Falls, that 50-mile radius, has to have a licensed property manager. That means that person has to have a contract. They have to be open to be audited by the state real estate commission. They've got to keep records. And so we have a real concern, again, as we're understanding it from the city, that responsible party can be open to be taken to court if the owner isn't taking care of the problem. So it's created a real different legal relationship from any person now to a responsible party. So we have a real concern about that situation.
Okay, thank you.
Can we ask?
Did we want to, we have a question that you, sorry, question
Well,
final
I
is
would
here.
have a question of Matt Tobias regarding
Okay,
this individual's comment. When I read that as responsible party, I made the assumption that it could have been me because my parents were down in Arizona. It does not state licensed property manager, or is a requirement to have a licensed property manager. So I'm wondering if that's maybe a bit of a reach. How would you interpret that as code enforcement?
You know, like we said before, there are 5 different definitions of a responsible party. And Paul, if Paul wants to chime in here on that, but there's 5 different definitions of people that we could hold accountable, and we could actually take citations, we could hold fines against. That's something that I think we would have to look at from our perspective too, whether or not that person needs to be a property manager. With that being said, responsible party, that wasn't our intention for going into that, thinking that they had to have to be a property manager or get some kind of a license, so to say. It was simply to be a responsible party.
Okay, and Councilor Urbanbach, my guess is that was not your intent either, that the individual responsible party had to be a licensed property manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. No, and the story that I often tell is, I've hypothetically decided that I'm moving to Florida and I'm leaving my home here, but my son-in-law who lives in town is going to be my responsible party. No, there is nothing there that says that that person needs to be any sort of licensed property manager. I would, if the committee would allow me, I would like to ask Paul Bingford to come forward. He has pieces of the city code that define what a responsible party are, so I'll let him kind of go into that.
sure, thank you. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Paul Bingford with the City Attorney's Office. Yes, South Dakota Multi-Housing did bring up their concern that the language was requiring individuals to be licensed property managers. And I'm more than happy to look at the state statute that they're referring to that they think causes this to happen. I'm not familiar with the one they're talking about right now, but we can certainly look into that issue. As Councilor Urbanbach indicated, that was not her intent. One of the things that I do want to make clear, though, is the ordinance as it is now, and I know this ordinance has been around since late 2003. There have been a couple of modifications over the years, but the ordinance now allows us under 150.177 subsection 5 to go after the responsible party, as defined by section 40.002. And the responsible party is, and it's listed there in all of our citations. It's important to know from a code enforcement perspective that the vast majority of the time, the city pursues the owner. And the reason for that is that if you pursue a tenant on a code enforcement violation or some other responsible party other than the owner, and they don't correct the problem, and ultimately that's what we're trying to accomplish in code enforcement is have the problem corrected, then we don't have the ability to pursue the owner in circuit court to allow the city to be able to clean up the property and assess it. Now, that's a last resort, and that's the last thing we want to do, but that's why we try to go after the owner, and we do under most circumstances. But if you look at how responsible party is defined under section 40.002, there are 5 different subsections there. It's the owner, it is the person who is in charge of the premises where the violation exists, the person's using the premises where the violation exists. If the above is a minor, a parent or guardian of the minor shall be the responsible party. And if any of the above is a business entity, it's the manager or on-site supervisor. Under our current ordinances, we can go after not just the owner, but any of the responsible parties and the 5 individuals listed. What this ordinance changes is it requires you that if you own property and you own rental property and you live more than 50 miles away, it requires you to have a responsible party that's local. We've always been able to pursue the responsible party, but you're not required to have anybody manage or monitor your property would probably be a better way to say it. You're not required right now, wherever you live, to have somebody monitor your property. If you live in the Philippines, it's probably a little difficult here to see if somebody dropped a mattress in your yard last night or a beer bottle or those kind of things. And so we just want, as part of this, to help with the enforcement, is if you live more than 50 miles away, we want to make sure that you have somebody local who can keep an eye on this property, who can be responsible if the snow needs shoveled, if the yard needs mowed, somebody we can contact. So the fact that we can pursue the responsible party is not a new change here, only the requirement that you have one if you live over 50 miles away.
Okay.
So, Paul, just to confirm once again, being a licensed property manager is not one of the 5 criteria that defines responsible party.
That is not the intent, and I know that they've raised the concern that what we are requiring here requires somebody to be a property manager, and I'm certainly happy to look at whatever law they're looking at to see if they think we put it into that kind of category. We can certainly look at that and make some modifications, but I'm just not familiar with the state law they're talking about that would require somebody to be a property manager. That's not the intent of this ordinance change.
When we define terms, we use instances of when it is, in this case, a responsible party. Do we ever include, it does not include, in this case, licensed property manager? Can it specifically state that this does not mean a licensed property manager is required? Can we reference that?
Sure, and that is a definite possibility. I think their concern is that what is put in the ordinance would require somebody to be a property manager, and I would have to see the wording of that state statute to see if we believe that's the case. But yeah, definitely something like that could be put in as well, Counselor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Staley?
Okay, Brian, I have a question for you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, a two-pronged question. So what would your group like to have as a wording instead of responsible party? First question. Second question, I see that whatever we call this entity is going to reside in Minnehaha or Lincoln counties. Now, what about somebody who lived in Iowa? What about, so we can't have a responsible party from Iowa or Minnesota, a relative living in Larchwood, say, that mom and dad leave and...
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We have been very specific about 50 miles from the city limits. If you, as a property owner, live within that 50 miles from the city limits, whatever that space is, then you don't need to have that responsible party. But if you live outside that circle that you draw around the city limits, then you do need to have a responsible party. And as Paul referenced, and as Matt has also said, it is to have someone local, someone that we can really just call them up and say, hey, your renter's not shoveling, can you just get it shoveled? I mean, it is as simple as that.
But you're saying Lincoln or Minnehaha, anywhere in Lincoln or Minnehaha. So the owner can live in Larchwood.
Yes, because
But-
Larchwood's just a few miles away.
Right, but
It's
the
within 50
responsible
mile.
party cannot,
Right,
according to this.
right, exactly.
Okay, so I would like to hear from Brian as to how their group feels about this.
Back to the first,
back to-
right,
yes.
back to the first one. I think the important words up there is when it says responsible party who is authorized to make or order repairs. I think and that's why we want to talk with our attorneys. I know your attorney wants to talk, but that changes some real level of responsibility that's authorized as a contractual word. And I would have concerns knowing that the city is going to say they could take me to court as a responsible party. If I don't have a contract with that property owner as a licensed property manager, I'd have some concerns. But if the attorney there is going to look at it, we will have our attorney also look at it. If the only thing you really want, the city wants, is to have a contact who lives within that boundary, someone they can talk to, great, then say a contact. But that's asking for something completely different, not just a contact, but a person they can hold legally responsible and take to court. And those are two different things. We're comfortable with saying you want a second, third contact that they can deal with and talk to and try and get them to resolve the problem. But there's a legal responsibility that now has been created with that wording that we have concerns about.
So someone who, for example, lives in Hawaii and has a property here, who do you think should be, so if something's happening with the property, who do you think should be responsible for taking care of it here?
First and foremost, the property owner, because of course it's his property.
And let's say he doesn't.
And he doesn't, yep, I recognize exactly where you're going with it. And it's the property owner, and you're going to have to work at pulling his license to own and have a rental property. There's some steps you can take. All I'm saying is this is a big change from just saying you want a secondary contact person. But if you also want to hold that secondary contact person legally responsible, then if I was that person you wanted to hold legally responsible for, I wouldn't do it without being a licensed property manager with a contract with the property owner. That's the only way I would get into this type of situation and be listed to protect myself.
So we could kind of call this an absentee owner situation where, let's just say you had a property and there wasn't a responsible party, and you got the owner living in Hawaii, and they don't shovel their sidewalk, and they don't mow their lawn, then the city just comes and does it and assesses fines on them, right? So, or hauling off the garbage or whatever that might be. I mean, there are ways that you can.
But that's not, let me add something really quick. I mean, that's something that the city can do, but that's not obviously what we want to do.
No, I understand.
We don't, and that's where we want another contact. I mean, I know I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I'm like, contact, because that's what we want. I mean, because we have properties, and it's frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. We have properties where owners, they just don't care. They don't do anything. And they're absent, and there could be a landlord, there's a tenant living in the property, and they don't do anything. Is we're maintaining their property, and that's not, we're not in that business. That's not the business we're in.
Okay, and then Brian, one more thing about the proximity piece. I mean, how is your group feeling about the Larchwood?
I would think most of the members probably disagree with having that restriction of having to be, if you're the contact person, that you're residing in Minnehaha or Lincoln County. I think probably disagree with that concept.
So you would like it to say what?
That there just needs to be a contact person, a secondary contact person.
How close do they live to Sioux Falls?
Within, I think they'd probably agree on the 50 miles again radius.
Okay, Councilor Neisert, And I think we've got about a 3-minute warning here, so.
Okay, so I'll try to go quick. So I would hope both sides would kind of work on the issue with this responsible party, and it's kind of a tough one because on the one hand, I could see you wouldn't want to be, create contractual relationships or something more complicated. On the other hand, if it's just a contact person and there's absolutely no responsibility on my part, I could be, guy lives in Hawaii and he calls me and tells me to go shovel, and yeah, I'll go shovel. But there's nothing behind it to make me go do it. Why, so I don't know how to solve that, but I think that should be something that I'll just let you, if there's something that you wanted to chime in about that, or.
I would just, because you're on a time limit, if I might, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, just kind of close the conversation. I would like for the committee to move this on. We're at a point where the entire council needs to have conversation about this. And it is one of those things that, again, where we are setting some strict protections for our own community. I absolutely will say that every time publicly. This is about protecting the members of our own community. It's about protecting our neighbors. It's about protecting those people who are the renters in less than desirable places. And it is about protecting those good landlords, because the registration system is a valuable system. You'll also find, if you do any research at all about this, that this is fairly common across the country to have a registration system of some kind. It's very rare to have a free registration system like Sioux Falls has. We really are trying to do the best that we can to keep the city out of the property management business and to protect our citizens and our landlords. So it would be my request to the committee to push this on to the council for first and second reading.
Okay. Good. Yes, Councilor Knight.
Can I just ask one real quick question? I see the term short-term rental unit is defined here, but usually then I look to see where if it's ever used, and I don't think I ever see it actually ever used. What was the intent there? Is residential rental unit, is it trying to basically say that anything that's rented for less than 28 days is not covered by this section? Is that what it's getting at?
Paul Bangford on behalf of the city. You're right. Short-term rental unit is not below. The intent of that was to make it clear that when you're defining residential rental unit and what that includes and what that doesn't, even if you are a person who rents property out sporadically, I mean, an example would be if you lived in Sturgis, obviously that's not going to affect us, and you rent your property out once a year for the Sturgis Rally because you go on vacation, and that it applies to everybody. Even short-term rental units are rental units. Now, clearly, if you have home owner-occupied classification, you're still not considered a renter, and there are other things that may preclude you. But whatever period of time you rent your house for, if you don't have home owner-occupied status, you still have a residential rental unit, and that's the purpose of adding that definition in there.
Okay, it's just, okay, so they're not included. I don't know if anywhere it should say specifically short-term rental units or not. Whatever,
right, and so it was just to specify that, hey, even short-term rental units, this applies to them as well. It probably could be interpreted just from looking at the definition of residential rental unit that if you rent it at all, but just wanted to make it clear that this is any amount of time that you would rent your property. I think it's a response to the Airbnbs and the VRBOs and those kind of things that you see are more prevalent lately.
Okay.
Okay, well, should we open it up to the committee here? Do we have any objections to moving this on to the council? Would that be the next move?
Well, I would
Mr.
like
Chair?
to say,
Yes, Mr. Kyle.
I would just
Chair
like to
Kyler.
say that I think that we've addressed this, and Councilor Erpenbach has actually taken input, came back, made corrections. I think we're at a close enough point where we can still reach terminology that's acceptable to all. I don't think it's anybody's intent in this room to hold the responsible party responsible for fines if it ever came to that point. So I would encourage us to move this forward to first and second reading, but I would just put the stipulation that it doesn't take place prior to the July 5th meeting. That does give a few more weeks to work on the language aspect of it.
So you'd make that motion?
I would make that motion.
Okay. we have a second, and then I'll call?
No, I'm not saying, I'm saying, what about
I
an
think
informational?
we need a second or it dies for lack of second, and then you have time for discussion,
So
Councilor Staley.
I'll second it for discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so this isn't going to an informational?
Well, we just made a motion to have it go to the council, didn't we?
I haven't heard the request for it to go to the informational, and it's been a matter of
I
months
thought
now.
it was okay, when you said to the council, I thought you meant we were going to have
Yes,
it come as an
correct,
informational.
Correct.
Okay, so all in favor?
So, and
Further discussion?
can I just make one more comment real quick? The only thing I would ask is, I'm in favor of moving this forward because I think it's close, but please look at that again, the responsible party, and also whether the 50 miles should be applicable to both the responsible party and the property owner, just for consistency.
Yes.
So those are the two things I would just say look at.
Okay. Okay. Well, it looks like I want to thank the presenters today. Seeing no further business, and there may be some, but we have no time, so.
Mr. Chair, just a real quick, all those in favor of the motion?
All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So thank you. If that is it, we will call this meeting adjourned.